Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 1 of For the Record program number 652, titled Palin By Comparison. This program is being recorded on November 8th of the year 2008. Well, this past week, of course, was Election Day, and Barack Obama became President of the United States, the first African-American president. And I'm going to be exploring a number of different issues vis-a-vis the election race itself, the candidates, and what we can reasonably expect. I'm going to be spending a lot of time analyzing aspects of Obama's background, and so there's an awful lot in the can. I can't stress for listeners, there's an awful lot in the wings, I should say, soon to be in the can. I can't stress to listeners strongly enough. SpitfireList.com. That's the website with links to other websites, including the websites run by WFMU at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emory. That has all of the For the Record shows available on streaming real audio and many of them on MP3. Very soon, going to have some wonderful announcements as far as the availability of material online. Very soon, just about everything I've done is going to be available online. But SpitfireList.com is the website that will get you up to date from a printed/academic site. We got a whole new website, much more professional, much more listener-friendly. New site, same fight, as we say. So please check out the Spitfire List website. Now, the first of the post-election programs that I'm going to be doing is going to be focusing not on Barack Obama or the winning party, but rather on the vice presidential candidate on the Republican side, because in Sarah Palin's background, really in Sarah Palin's foreground, there are some very sinister forces that are to be readily seen if we take the time to look at them. And beyond that, there are a number of very, very interesting connections between the Sarah Palin milieu, I wonder if she knows what that word means, and the secessionist/UNPO/ we got to support the minorities' rights against the big bad majorities, which sounds great until you realize that the UNPO and related organizations are fascist organizations that are championing the rights of smaller groups of people in order to break up rival states for the purposes of advancing the causes of various types of imperialism, including domination by what I call the underground Reich. Now, my guess is that there are X number of listeners out there who've been kind of wondering, what has Dave been eating, drinking, smoking, breathing? When I talk about organizations like the UNPO and their championing of the rights of groups, including the groups such as the Lakota and Hawaiians here in the United States, whose native secessionist rights, to coin a term, would precipitate, at least to a certain extent, the breakup of the United States proper. I think that in the event of a total economic collapse and perhaps a political catastrophe such as a terrorist incident using weapons of mass destruction, I think the breakup of the United States is a very real possibility. I think that the underground Reich and beyond that, I think very powerful forces of darkness, stretching all the way back to the pre-Enlightenment period, intend for the breakup of the United States because they intend to bring about not just world fascism or even primarily world fascism, but the end of the Enlightenment itself. A couple of days ago, I was talking with some station staff members here at KFJC, where I record this program in Northern California, and one of the station management members asked me if I thought this was the most important election of all time, meaning the one that happened this past week. I wouldn't give the election's ranking. Certainly it was an important one, but I don't think that it was any more or less important than the ones that went before or the ones that are going to come after. The real point is that things are as they are because that's the way people make them or the way they fail to make them. And what I mentioned to this person, I brought that up, and I said to them that as near as I can tell, to make a very, very long story very, very short, what is intended and what against that against which Dave Emory fights is the plan to basically break the human spirit. The human spirit is to be utterly shattered and then subdued for the duration. And I believe that the breakup of the United States, the deep sixing of the country that began the anti-imperial revolutionary trend, so to speak, with the American Revolution, breaking up a country that really was a product of the Enlightenment, and for all of America's enormous shortcomings, in many ways this country did serve as a beacon to much of the rest of the world. And believe me, I think there are some very dark forces that want to see to it that that beacon becomes a lesson to future generations, that they should never, ever try to achieve enlightenment or democracy or egalitarian government. Liberté, égalité, et fraternité. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, as the French Revolutionary slogan had it, because it ends in what the U.S. ended in, which was ruin and bloodshed and darkness of an extreme nature. I think that Sarah Palin, for all of her small town, small state charm, in many ways is a consummate fascist manifestation, precisely because she represents herself and has been represented as sort of a Ms. Every Woman or every person. In fact, Sarah Palin not only holds some extreme views, but at the same time as she's being sort of held up as an all-American icon, when one shifts the camera slightly to either side, one finds, particularly if you slide the camera to the right, what you find is forces that not only are profoundly un-American, but forces that intend to break up the United States. Forces that are as un-American as it is possible to be. That's what we're going to be exploring in this broadcast. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing, and again I stress to listeners, use the description for this program when it comes up at spitfirelist.com, because that'll have links and, as is the case with so many descriptions, information that I don't have time to fit in the original broadcast. But Sarah Palin's husband, Todd, has been a member of the Alaskan Independence Party for a long time. He also has been described as a shadow governor. And the Alaskan Independence Party is not only a party that advocates Alaska's secession from the United States, but it is a fascist political party with evidentiary tributaries running in the direction of the Iranian mullahs, who backed Alaskan independence. It is an affiliate of the Constitution Party, which is a domestic fascist political party with associations with organizations like the Aryan Nations, organizations like the League of the South, a neo-Confederate organization. And to give an idea, to make a very long story very short, at the top of the masthead of the website of the Alaskan Independence Party, to which Sarah Palin's husband belonged for years, and to which Sarah Palin is very close, is a motto from none other than Jefferson Davis. Now, Jefferson Davis was also a past American president. For those people who might not be familiar with him, Jefferson Davis was president of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. And at the top of the masthead of the Alaskan Independence Party is a quote from President Jefferson Davis, which I think in many ways serves to introduce us to the political forces embodied in Sarah Palin, who is not the vice president of the Confederate States of America, but who intended to be the vice president of what, at least for the time being, was the United States of America, and what might very well have become, or what might become, the disunited States of America. Jefferson Davis said, "The principle for which we contend is bound to reassert itself, though it may be at another time and in another form," unquote. That, a quote from Confederate President Jefferson Davis at the top of the masthead of the website of the Alaskan Independence Party. The first of two good articles from Salon magazine about Sarah Palin, Todd Palin, and the AIP was printed on October 7th of 2008. This article is by David Talbot. It was headlined by Salon.com, "The Palins' Un-American Activities," and subtitled, "Imagine if the Obamas had hooked up with a violently anti-American group in league with the government of Iran." Now note here not only the, again, violently anti-American sentiments of the party to which Sarah Palin's husband belonged and to which she remains quite close, but note also that this organization was getting support from the Iranian mullahs. And in the past we've looked at the fascist connections of the Iranian Islamic fundamentalist government running from the Al-Taqwa milieu to Francois Genoux to elements that descended from the Third Reich and are part of what I call the Underground Reich, to elements associated with the Holocaust denial movement, people like former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke and German neo-Nazi lawyer and theoretician Jürgen Rieger, both of whom were networking with President Ahmadinejad of Iran at the December 2006 Holocaust denial conference that he held. So let's take a look at just what Sarah Palin has in her political cachet, so to speak. From Salon.com, David Talbot, The Palins Un-American Activities, October 7, 2008. It reads, "My government is my worst enemy, and I'm going to fight them with any means at hand," unquote. This was former revolutionary terrorist Bill Ayers back in his old Weather Underground days, right? Imagine what Sarah Palin is going to do with this incendiary quote as she tears into Barack Obama this week. Only one problem. The quote is from Joe Vogler, the raging anti-American who founded the Alaskan Independence Party. Inconveniently for Palin, that's the very same secessionist party that her husband Todd belonged to for 7 years and that she sent a shout-out to as Alaska governor earlier this year. "Keep up the good work," Palin told AIP members, "and God bless you," unquote. AIP chairwoman Lynette Clark told me recently that Sarah Palin is her kind of gal. Quote, "She's Alaskan to the bone. She sounds just like Joe Vogler," unquote. So who are these America haters that the Palins are palling around with? Before his strange murder in 1993, party founder Vogler preached armed insurrection against the United States of America. Vogler, who always carried a magnum with him, was fond of saying, "When the federal bureaucrats come after me, I suggest they wear red coats. They make better targets that way. In the federal government are the biggest liars in the United States, and I hate them with a passion. They think they own Alaska. There comes a time when people will choose to die with honor rather than live with dishonor. That time may be coming here. Our goal is ultimate independence by peaceful means under a minimal government fully responsive to the people. I hope we don't have to take human life, but if they go tramping on our property rights, look out. We're ready to die." This quote is from Coming into the Country by John McPhee, who traipsed around Alaska's remote gold mining country with Vogler for his 1991 book. The violent-tempered secessionist vowed to McPhee that if any federal official tried to stop him from polluting Alaska's rivers with his earth-moving equipment, he would, quote, "run over him with a cat and turn mosquitoes loose on him while he dies," unquote. Vogler wasn't just a blowhard either. He put his secessionist ideas into action, working to build AIP membership to 20,000, an impressive figure by Alaska standards, and to elect party member Walter Hickel as governor in 1990. Vogler's greatest moment of glory was to be his 1993 appearance before the United Nations to denounce United States, quote, "tyranny," unquote, before the entire world, and to demand Alaska's freedom. The Alaska secessionist had persuaded the government of Iran to sponsor his anti-American harangue. That's right, Iran, the Islamic dictatorship, the taker of American hostages, the rogue nation that McCain and Palin have excoriated Obama for suggesting we diplomatically engage. Yes, that Iran. AIP leaders allege that Vogler, who was murdered that year by a fellow secessionist, was taken out by powerful forces in the U.S. before he could reach his UN platform. Quote, "The United States government would have been deeply embarrassed," unquote, by Vogler's UN speech, darkly suggests Clark. "And we can't have that, can we?" unquote. The Republican ticket is working hard this week to make Barack Obama's tenuous connection to graying 60s revolutionary Bill Ayers a major campaign issue. But the Palins' connection to anti-American extremism is much more central to their political biographies. Imagine the uproar if Michelle Obama was revealed to have joined a black nationalist party whose founder preached armed secession from the United States and who enlisted the government of Iran in his cause. The Obama campaign would probably not have survived such an explosive revelation, particularly if Barack Obama himself was videotaped giving the anti-American secessionists his wholehearted support just months ago. Where's the outrage, Sarah Palin has been asking this week in her attacks on Obama's fuzzy ties to Ayers? The question is more appropriate when applied to her own disturbing associations. Well, yes, indeed, and we're going to explore the Alaskan Independence Party still further. Now, again, note that Sarah Palin's husband, Todd, is not only a member of that, but is described as a shadow governor in a number of jottings, and also Sarah Palin herself, as indicated in the article we just read, was giving a shout-out. She basically delivered her best wishes to the AIP just this year. And what we're going to take a look at now is more about the political agenda and activities of the AIP, how it in many ways appears to have co-opted Sarah Palin as something of a cat's paw within Alaskan mainstream Republican politics. And we're also in particular going to take a look at the agenda being pushed by the AIP, which intends to infiltrate and co-opt more mainstream conservative parties, particularly the Republican Party of Alaska. Now, bear in mind that an AIP member, former Nixon cabinet member Walter Hickel, became governor of Alaska running under the AIP. Eventually, he converted back to being a Republican. But Walter Hickel, basically, former AIP governor of Alaska, said of Sarah Palin, quote, basically, I made her governor. Bear in mind, too, as we're going to see later on in the broadcast, the AIP is the Alaskan, contingent of a loose consortium of fascist political parties grouped around the Constitution Party, which also basically has evidentiary tributaries running in the direction of, among other institutions, the Aryan nations as well as the Neo-Confederate Secessionist League of the South. Another very good Salon.com article about Sarah Palin's AIP connections was authored by Max Blumenthal and David Nywert. This is from Salon.com from October 10th of 2008. This article is titled Meet Sarah Palin's Radical Right-Wing Pals. On the afternoon of September 24th in downtown Palmer, Alaska, as the sun began to sink behind the snow-capped mountains that flank the picturesque Mat-Su Valley, 51-year-old Mark Creisen sat for an hour on a park bench reveling in tales of his days as chairman of the Alaskan Independence Party. The stocky, gray-haired computer technician waxed nostalgic about quixotic battles to eliminate taxes, subvert the traditional family, unquote, and secede from the United States. So long as Alaska remained under the boot of the federal government, said Creisen, the AIP had to stand on guard to stymie a new world order. He invited a Salon reporter to see a few items inside his pickup truck that were intended for his personal protection. This here's my attack dog, he said with a chuckle, handing the reporter an exuberant 8-pound papillon from his passenger seat. Her name is Susie, unquote. Then he pulled a 9mm Makarov PM pistol, once the standard-issue sidearm for Soviet cops, out of his glove compartment. Quote, I've got enough weaponry to raise a small army in my basement, he said, clutching the gun in his palm. Then again, so do most Alaskans, unquote. But Creisen added a message of reassurance to residents of that faraway place some Alaskans call the 48. We want to go our separate ways, he said, but we're not going to kill you, unquote. Though Creisen belongs to a fringe political party, one that advocates the secession of Alaska from the Union and that organizes with other like-minded secessionist movements from Canada to the Deep South, he is not without peculiar influence in state politics, especially in the rise of Sarah Palin. An obscure figure outside of Alaska, Creisen has been a political fixture in the hometown of the Republican vice presidential nominee for over a decade. During the 1990s, when Creisen directed the AIP, he and another radical right-winger, Steve Stoll, played a quiet but pivotal role in electing Palin as mayor of Wasilla and shaping her political agenda afterward. Both Stoll and Creisen not only contributed to Palin's campaign financially, they played major behind-the-scenes roles in the Palin camp before, during, and after her mayoral victory. Palin backed Creisen as he successfully advanced a host of anti-tax, pro-gun initiatives, including one that altered the state constitution's language to better facilitate the formation of anti-government militias. She joined in their vendetta against several local officials they disliked and listened to their advice about hiring. She attempted to name Stoll, a John Birch Society activist known in the Mat-Su Valley as Black Helicopter Steve, to an empty Wasilla City Council seat. Every time I showed up, her door was open, said Chryson, and that policy continued when she became governor. When Chryson first met Sarah Palin, however, he didn't really trust her politically. It was the early 1990s when he was a member of a local libertarian pressure group called SAGE, or Standing Against Government Excess. SAGE's founder, Tammy McGraw, was Palin's birth coach. Palin was a leader in a pro-sales tax citizens group called WOW, or Watch Over Wasilla, earning a political credential before her 1992 campaign for city council. Though he was impressed by her interpersonal skills, Chryson greeted Palin's election warily, thinking she was too close to the Democrats on the council and too pro-tax. But soon, Palin and Chryson discovered they could be useful to each other. Palin would be running for mayor while Chryson was about to take over the chairmanship of the Alaskan Independence Party, which at its peak in 1990 had managed to elect a governor. The AIP was born of the vision of old Joe Vogler, a hard-bitten former gold miner who hated the government of the United States almost as much as he hated wolves and environmentalists. His resentment peaked during the early 1970s when the federal government began installing Alaska's oil and gas pipeline. Fueled by raw rage, quote, "The United States has made a colony of Alaska," unquote, he told author John McPhee in 1977, Vogler declared a maverick candidacy for the governorship in 1982. Though he lost, old Joe became a force to be reckoned with as well as a constant source of amusement for Alaska's political class. During a gubernatorial debate in 1982, Vogler proposed using nuclear weapons to obliterate the glaciers blocking roadways to Juneau. "There's gold under there," he exclaimed. Vogler made another failed run for the governor's mansion in 1986, but the AIP's fortunes shifted suddenly 4 years later when Vogler convinced Richard Nixon's former Interior Secretary, Wally Hickel, to run for governor under his party's banner. Hickel coasted to victory, outflanking a moderate Republican and a centrist Democrat. An arch-conservative Republican running under the AIP candidate, Jack Coghill, was elected lieutenant governor. Hickel's subsequent failure as governor to press for a vote on Alaskan independence rankled old Joe. With sponsorship from the Islamic Republic of Iran, Vogler was scheduled to present his case for Alaskan secession before the United Nations General Assembly in the late spring of 1993. But before he could, old Joe's long, strange political career ended tragically that May when he was murdered by a fellow secessionist. Hickel rejoined the Republican Party the year after Vogler's death and didn't run for re-election. Lieutenant Governor Coghill's campaign to succeed him as the AIP candidate for governor ended in disaster. He peeled away just enough votes from the Republican Jim Campbell to throw the gubernatorial election to Democrat Tony Knowles. Despite that disaster, Coghill hung on as AIP chairman for 3 more years. When he was asked to resign in 1997, Mark Chryson replaced him. Chryson pursued a dual policy of cozying up to secessionist and right-wing groups in Alaska and elsewhere, while also attempting to replicate the AIP's success with Hickel in infiltrating the mainstream. Unlike some radical right-wingers, Chryson doesn't put forward his ideas freighted with anger or paranoia. And in a state where defense of gun and property rights often takes on a real religious fervor, Chryson was able to present himself as a typical Alaskan. He rose through party ranks by reducing the AIP's platform to a single page that, quote, 90% of Alaskans could agree with, unquote. This meant scrubbing the old platform of what Chryson called racist language, unquote, while accommodating the state's growing Christian right movement by emphasizing the AIP's commitments to the traditional family, unquote. The AIP is very family-oriented, Chryson explained. We're for the traditional family, daddy, mommy, kids, because we all know that it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and we don't care if Heather has 2 mommies. That's not a traditional family, unquote. Chryson further streamlined the AIP's platform by softening its secessionist language. Instead of calling for immediate separation from the United States, the platform now demands a vote on independence. Yet Chryson maintains that his party remains committed to full independence. Quote, "The Alaskan Independence Party has got links to almost every independence-minded movement in the world," Chryson exclaimed, parenthetically including the UNPO, Lakota and Hawaiian independence, the League of the South, Vermont secessionists, the Chechens, the Hawaiians, or as I mentioned that, the Tibetans, the Inner Mongolians, the Uyghurs, surprise, surprise. Continuing, and Alaska is not the only place that's about separation. There's at least 30 different states that are talking about some type of separation from the United States. This has meant rubbing shoulders and forging alliances with outright white supremacists and far-right theocrats, particularly those who dominate the proceedings at such gatherings as the North American Secessionist Conventions, which AIP delegates have attended in recent years. The AIP's affiliation with neo-Confederate organizations is motivated as much by ideological affinity as by organizational convenience. Indeed, Creisen makes no secret of his sympathy for the lost cause. Quote, "Should the Confederate States have been allowed to separate and go their peaceful ways," unquote, Crichton asked rhetorically. Yes. The War of Northern Aggression, or the Civil War, or the War between the states, however you want to refer to it, was not about slavery. It was about states' rights, unquote. Another far-right organization with whom the AIP has been long aligned is Howard Phillips' militia-minded Constitution Party. The AIP has been listed as the Constitution Party's state affiliate since the late 1990s, and it has endorsed the Constitution Party's presidential candidates Michael Peroutka and Chuck Baldwin in the past two elections. The Constitution Party boasts an openly theocratic platform that reads, quote, "It is our goal to limit the federal government to its delegated, enumerated, constitutional functions and to restore American jurisprudence to its original biblical common law foundations," unquote. In its 1990s incarnation as the U.S. Taxpayers Party, it was on the front lines in promoting the militia movement, and a significant portion of its membership comprises former and current militia members. At its 1992 convention, the AIP hosted both Phillips, the USTP's presidential candidate, and militia movement leader Colonel James Bo Greitz, who was campaigning for president under the banner of the far-right Populist Party. According to Creisen, AIP regulars heavily supported Greitz, but the party deferred to Phillips' presence and issued no official endorsements. By the way, the Populist Party was the creature of the Nazi Liberty Lobby. Continuing, in Wasilla, the AIP became powerful by proxy because of Creisen and Stoll's alliance with Sarah Palin. Creisen and Stoll had found themselves in constant opposition to policies of Wasilla's Democratic mayor, who started his three-term, 9-year tenure in 1987. By 1992, Creisen and Stoll had been convening regular protests outside City Council. Their demonstrations invariably involved grievances against any and all forms of socialist government, unquote, from city planning to public education. Stoll shared Creisen's conspiratorial views. Quote, "The rumor was that he had wrapped his guns in plastic and buried them in his yard so he could get them after the New World Order took over," unquote, Stein told a reporter. Creisen did not trust Palin when she joined the city council in 1992. He claimed that she was handpicked by the Democratic city council leaders and by Wasilla's Democratic mayor John Stein to rubber stamp their tax hike proposals. "When I first met her," he said, "I thought she was extremely left, but I've watched her slowly as she's become more pronounced in her conservative ideology." We're going to continue with this article in Side 2. We're going to indeed see just how profoundly the Alaskan Independence Party and Steve Stoll and Mr. Creisen, Mark Creisen, we're going to see the influence they wielded over Sarah Palin. Again, somebody who was to a large extent a more or less overt, somewhat between the lines, but to a certain extent an overt exponent of an overt secessionist party. Well, she was running for vice president on the Republican ticket, and it's going to be interesting to see how the presence of elements like this in the political opposition will manifest themselves with the first African-American president of the United States. However, we're going to go into that in Side 2 of this broadcast. Spitfirelist.com. That's the website. Much newer, more professional, more user-friendly website. New site, same fight. Use the website, please, and the myriad of information that's on it. That concludes Side 1 of For the Record program number 652, Palin by Comparison. This program has been recorded on November 8th of the year 2008. My name is Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name is Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 of For the Record program number 652, Palin By Comparison. This is being recorded on November 8th of the year 2008. What we're doing in this broadcast, before we begin examining some aspects of Barack Obama's background and ruminating about his election and his presidency to be, by the way, a situation about which I have many more questions than answers, I thought it would be worth taking a good in-depth look at what was running on the Republican ticket, not John McCain, but what was running as his vice president. And when one gets past the superficiality of the Sarah Palin candidacy and the Tina Fey Saturday Night Live chic, one comes across some really, really disturbing things. Not just the woman, meaning Sarah Palin's fundamental ignorance about key world issues, but the fact that behind the lipstick on this hockey mom, one finds some overtly fascist and secessionist elements that are, in their essence, profoundly anti-American, and beyond that, elements that are Nazi and fascist. This should not come as too great a surprise, perhaps, to longtime listeners to this program and to serious students of the American political landscape, because, in fact, the Republican Party has long-standing connections to fascism, going back to, well, really before World War II, to the 1934 coup attempt, in which many of the industrialists and financiers who paid the Republican bosses attempted to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt. At the end of the war, many of the most heinous Nazi war criminals and Central and Eastern European fascists were brought into the United States under the auspices of the Crusade for Freedom. Key names there: Allen Dulles, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, William Casey, and ultimately the elder George Bush were the people who helped to cement this Nazi axis inside of the Republican Party. That's Nazi axis in the GOP matured, I guess one could say, with the election of Ronald Reagan and the ascension of a woman named Helena von Damme to the position of selecting the lists from which Ronald Reagan made his cabinet appointments. Helena von Damme was the protege of Otto von Bolschwing. Otto von Bolschwing, one of the key Nazi spies in the Middle East, jumped to the CIA. A man who was very close to the Grand Mufti, a man who also became very close to Ronald Reagan. Otto von Bolschwing was Adolf Eichmann's superior in the SS in administering so-called Jewish matters for the Third Reich at one point in time, and Helena von Damme was his protege, and she selected the lists from which Ronald Reagan made his cabinet appointments, which is how we find people like the head of Resistance Records and other people openly associated with various Nazi and fascist elements in the administration of Ronald Reagan. I reviewed a few of those in For the Record program number 647, and we'll go over a few more of those later. But so it really should not come as all that much of a surprise to see these kinds of elements connected to the candidacy of John McCain and his selection of Sarah Palin. But I thought I would begin the post-election series of new broadcasts by discussing Sarah Palin's political background, because we've been talking about organizations like the UNPO, the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, which recognizes minority groups such as the Tibetans, the Lakota, the Hawaiians in the U.S. and others, the Chechens and others. The UNPO, headed up by Karl von Habsburg, basically supports the rights of small minorities in an apparent attempt to break up larger countries which could rival an underground Reich and could present a potential obstacle to world fascism at a point in the future. I assume that X number of listeners have perhaps found some of my discussion of the possibility of the U.S. breaking up following an economic catastrophe and perhaps a political catastrophe as well, such as the elimination of a city with weapons of mass destruction. Perhaps that doesn't look quite as strange now. Certainly the U.S. is in dire economic position, and with the first African-American president getting ready to take office, looking at the openly racist, openly secessionist, openly fascist, and openly neo-Confederate elements that loom in the background of Sarah Palin, I think it is important to take this up and to ruminate about just what might take place under an Obama presidency. Indeed, I think the forces that are grouped behind Sarah Palin and the AIP are the very forces that we've been looking at in connection with the UNPO, in the connection with the seemingly enlightened and progressive agenda of promoting the rights of small minority peoples. But in fact, that seeming libertarian agenda is in fact aiming at breaking up larger countries and at curtailing freedom and doing so at the behest of the underground Reich and the forces of darkness. What we're going to do in the second side of the program at the beginning is we're going to go back to an article from Salon.com. And again, for people that may have found some of my talk of the UNPO and possible secessionist forces in the U.S., and maybe some people found that sort of way out and a bit over the top, take a look at what lies in the background, and really not in the background, but the foreground of Sarah Palin's political career. And Sarah Palin, of course, was the vice presidential nominee. This from Salon.com of October 10th, 2008, article by Max Blumenthal and David Nywert, Meet Sarah Palin's Radical Right-Wing Pals. Now, we've been taking a look at two of the key people in the AIP, the Alaska Independence Party, Mark Kreisen and Steve Stoll. Now, the Alaskan Independence Party is one of the driving forces behind Sarah Palin's political persona, and the AIP in turn is the Alaskan affiliate of the Constitution Party, part of a constellation of fascist and secessionist parties in the United States with direct evidentiary tributaries running in the direction of the Aryan Nations, Neo-Confederate League of the South, and others. By way of taking a look at just to what extent Sarah Palin was manifesting the political agenda of secessionists Mark Kreisen and Stephen Stoll, we're going to resume with this Salon.com article from October 10th of 2008. Now, Sarah Palin has joined the Wasilla City Council in 1992, and Mark Kreisen does not trust her. It's at that point that we rejoin the article. Kreisen did not trust Palin when she joined the city council in 1992. He claimed that she was handpicked by Democratic city council leaders and by Wasilla's Democratic Major, John Stein, to rubber stamp their tax hike proposals. When I first met her, he said, I thought she was extremely left, but I've watched her slowly as she's become more pronounced in her conservative ideology, unquote. Palin was well aware of Kreisen's views. She knew my beliefs, Kreisen said. The entire state knew my beliefs. I wasn't afraid of being on the news, on camera, speaking my views, unquote. But Kreisen believes she trusted his judgment because he accurately predicted what life on the city council would be like. We were telling her, this is probably what's going to happen, he said. The city is going to give this many people raises, they're going to pave everybody's roads, and they're going to pave the city council members' roads. We couldn't have scripted it better, because everything we predicted came true, unquote. After intense evangelizing by Kreisen and his political allies, they claimed Sarah Palin as a convert. Quote, when she started taking her job seriously, Kreisen said, the people who put her in as the rubber stamp found out the hard way that she was not going to go their way, unquote. In 1994, Sarah Palin attended the Alaska Independence Party's statewide convention. In 1995, her husband Todd changed his voter registration to AIP. Except for an interruption of a few months, he would remain registered as an AIP member until 2002, when he changed his registration to undeclared. In 1996, Palin decided to run against John Stein as the Republican candidate for mayor of Wasilla. While Palin pushed back against Stein's policies, particularly those related to funding public works, Kreisen said he and Steve Stoll prepared the groundwork for her mayoral campaign. Kreisen and Stoll viewed Palin's ascendancy as a vehicle for their own political ambitions. Quote, she got support from these guys, Stein remarked. I think smart politicians never utter these kinds of radical things, but they let other people do it for them. I never recall Sarah saying she supported the militia or taking a public stand like that, but these guys were definitely behind Sarah, thinking she was the more conservative choice, unquote. They worked behind the scenes, unquote, said Stein. I think they had a lot of influence in terms of helping the backscattered negative campaigning, unquote. Indeed, Creason boasted that he and his allies urged Palin to focus her campaign on slashing character-based attacks. For instance, Creason advised Palin to paint Stein as a sexist who had told her to, quote, just sit back there and look pretty, unquote, when she served on Wasilla's city council. Though Palin never made this accusation, her 1996 campaign for mayor was the most negative Wasilla residents had ever witnessed. While Palin played up her total opposition to the sales tax and gun control, the two hobgoblins of the AIP, mailers spread throughout the town portraying her as the Christian candidate, unquote. A subtle suggestion that Stein, who was Lutheran, might be Jewish, quote. I watched that campaign unfold, bringing a level of slime our community hadn't seen until then, recalled Phil Munger, a local music teacher who counts himself as a close friend of Stein. Again quoting, this same group, Stoll and Creason, also publicly challenged me on whether my wife and I were married because she had kept her maiden name, Stein bitterly recalled, so we literally had to produce a marriage certificate. And, as I recall, they said, well, you could have forged that, unquote. When Palin won the election, the men who had once shouted anti-government slogans outside City Hall now had a foothold inside the mayor's office. Palin attempted to pay back her newfound pals during her first city council meeting as mayor. In that meeting on October 14, 1996, she appointed Stoll to one of the city council's two newly vacant seats. But Palin was blocked by the single vote of then-Councilman Nick Carney, who had endured countless rancorous confrontations with Stoll and considered him a violent, unquote, influence on local politics. Though Palin considered consulting attorneys about finding another means of placing Stoll on the council, she was ultimately forced to back down and accept a compromise candidate. Emboldened by his nomination by Mayor Palin, Stoll later demanded she fire Wasilla's museum director, John Cooper, a personal enemy he longed to sabotage. Palin obliged, eliminating Cooper's position in short order. Gotcha, Cooper, Stoll told the deposed museum director after his termination, as Cooper told a reporter for the New York Times, and it only cost me a campaign contribution, unquote. Stoll, who donated $1,000 to Palin's mayoral campaign, did not respond to numerous requests for an interview. Palin has blamed budget concerns for Cooper's departure. By the way, for people who may have just joined the broadcast, I'm reading an article from Salon.com from October 10th of 2008. Meet Sarah Palin's radical right-wing pals. What we're looking at is the way in which Mark Creason and Steve Stoll of the Alaska Independence Party basically helped to craft Sarah Palin when she was the mayor of Wasilla, and to a large extent they helped to shape Sarah Palin as a political animal, with its anti-American, overtly secessionist and fascist and Nazi evidentiary tributaries and links. The fact that members of the AIP could have shaped a woman who was to become the vice presidential nominee of a major political party is worth considering at length and in detail. So that's what we're looking at here. And again, we're looking at the influence of the AIP through Mark Creason and Steve Stoll on Sarah Palin when she was the mayor of Wasilla. Continuing. The following year, when Carney proposed a local gun control measure, Palin organized with Creason to smother the nascent plan in its cradle. Carney's proposed ordinance would have prohibited residents from carrying guns into schools, bars, hospitals, government offices, and playgrounds. Infuriated by the proposal that Carney viewed as a common-sense public safety measure, Crichton and his 7 allies stormed a July 1997 council meeting. With the bill still in its formative stages, Carney was not even ready to present it to the council, let alone conduct public hearings on it. He and other council members objected to the ad hoc hearing as a waste of time, unquote, but Palin, in plain violation of council rules and norms, insisted that Creason testify, stating, according to the minutes, that, quote, she invites the public to speak on any issue at any time, unquote. When Carney tried later in the meeting to have the ordinance discussed officially at the following regular council meeting, he couldn't even get a second. His proposal died that night thanks to Palin and her extremist allies. Quote, a lot of it was the ultra-conservative far right that is against everything in government, including taxes, unquote, recalled Carney. A lot of it was a personal attack on me as being anti-gun, and a personal attack on anybody who deigned to threaten their authority to carry a loaded firearm wherever they pleased. That was the tenor of it, and it was being choreographed by Steve Stoll and the mayor," unquote. Asked if he thought it was Palin who instigated the turnout, he replied, "I know it was," unquote. By Chryson's account, he and Palin also worked hand in glove to slash property taxes and block a state proposal that would have taken money for public programs from the permanent fund dividend or the oil and gas fund that doles out annual payments to citizens of Alaska. Palin endorsed Chryson's unsuccessful initiative to move the state legislature from Juneau to Wasilla. She also lent her support to Chryson's crusade to alter the Alaska Constitution's language on gun rights so cities and counties could not impose their own restrictions. It took over 10 years to get the language written in, Chryson said, but Sarah Palin was there supporting it, unquote. With Sarah as a mayor, said Chryson, there were a number of times when I just showed up at City Hall and said, "Hey, Sarah, we need help," unquote. I think there was only one time when I wasn't able to talk to her, and that because she was in a meeting. That was because she was in a meeting, unquote. Chryson says the door remains open now that Palin is governor. Palin's office did not respond to Salon's request for an interview. While Palin has been more circumspect in her dealings with groups like the AIP as she has risen through the political ranks, she has stayed in touch. When Palin ran for governor in 2006, marketing herself as a fresh-faced reformer determined to crush the GOP's ossified power structure, she made certain to appear at the AIP's state convention. To burnish her maverick image, she also tapped one-time AIP member and born-again Republican Walter Hickel as her campaign co-chair. Hickel barnstormed the state for Palin, hailing her support for an all-Alaska liquefied gas pipeline, a project first promoted in 2002 by an AIP gubernatorial candidate named Nels Anderson. When Palin delivered her victory speech on election night, Hickel stood beaming by her side. "I made her governor," he boasted afterward. 2 years later, Hickel has endorsed Palin's bid for vice president. One wonders if, had John McCain been elected president and had Sarah Palin been elected vice president, if her door would have still been as open to these people, or had McCain been elected and then bought the farm, so to speak, one wonders if the White House would have been open to her as well. And if, for example, or if, just for the purposes of discussion, the economy collapses still further, and if some of the neo-Confederate affiliates of the Alaska Independence Party were to succeed in assassinating Barack Obama, perhaps getting a hold of a nuke through whatever channels and lighting it off in Washington, if that might perhaps precipitate the political and economic collapse that would lead to the secession desired by the AI, or the secessions desired by people like the AIP and their neo-Confederate allies. And again, for those listeners who may have thought some of my discussion of the UNPO and related topics was a bit far out, and some of my ruminations on a breakup of the United States were just beyond the pale, so to speak, well, take a look at what you had. Take a look at the pit bull with lipstick that you had running for vice president on the Republican ticket, and bear in mind that the forces that she embodies and represents have not gone away. These Nazi elements inside of the Republican Party have not gone away. That Aryan Nations associate who was helping to pick the security clearances for the Reagan administration, these people have not gone away. And what are they going to do in the future? How are they going to react with the first African-American president? We'll see, won't we? More about Sarah Palin and the Alaskan Independence Party. Just months before Palin burst onto the national stage as McCain's vice presidential nominee, she delivered a videotaped address to the AIP's annual convention. Her message was scrupulously free of secessionist rhetoric, but complimentary nonetheless. "I share your party's vision of upholding the Constitution of our great state," Palin told the Assembly of AIP delegates. "My administration remains focused on reining in government growth so individual liberty can expand. I know you agree with that. Keep up the good work, and God bless you," unquote. When Palin became the Republican vice presidential nominee, her attendance at the 1994 and 2006 AIP conventions and her husband's membership in the party, as well as Palin's videotaped welcome to the AIP's 2008 convention, generated a minor controversy. Creisen claimed, however, that Sarah and Todd Palin never even played a minor role in his party's internal affairs. She's never been a member of the Alaskan Independence Party, Creisen insisted. Todd has, but most of rural Alaska has, too. I never saw him at a meeting. They were at one meeting I was at. Sarah said hello, but I didn't pay attention because I was taking care of business. But whether the Palins participated directly in shaping the AIP's program is less relevant than the extent to which they will implement that program. Creisen and his allies have demonstrated just as much interest in grooming major party candidates as they have in putting forward their own people. At a national convention of secessionist groups in 2007, AIP Vice Chairman Dexter Clark announced that his party would seek to, quote, infiltrate the Democratic and Republican parties with candidates sympathetic to its hard-right secessionist agenda. Quote, you should use that tactic. You should infiltrate, unquote, Clark told his audience of neo-Confederates, theocrats, and libertarians. Quote, whichever party you think in that area you can get something done, get into that party. Even though that party has its problems right now, that is the only avenue. Clark pointed to Palin's political career as the model of a successful infiltration. There's a lot of talk of her moving up, Clark said of Palin. She was a member of the AIP when she was mayor of a small town. That was a nonpartisan job. But to get along and go along, she switched to the Republican Party. She is pretty well sympathetic because of her membership, unquote. Clark's assertion that Palin was once a card-carrying AIP member was swiftly discredited by the McCain campaign, which produced records showing she'd been a registered Republican since 1988. But then why would Clark make such a statement? Why did he seem confident that Palin was a true blue AIP activist burrowing within the Republican Party? The most salient answer is that Palin was once so thoroughly embedded with AIP figures like Creisen and Stoll and seemed so enthusiastic about their agenda, Clark may have simply assumed she belonged to his party. Now, Palin is a household name and her every move is scrutinized by the Washington press corps. She can no longer afford to kibitz with secessionists, however instrumental they may have been to her meteoric ascendancy. This does not trouble her old AIP allies, however. Indeed, Creisen is hopeful that Palin's inauguration will also represent the start of a new infiltration. I've had my issues, but she's still staying true to her core values, Creisen concluded. Sarah's friends don't all agree with her, but do they respect her? Do they respect her ideology and her values? Definitely, unquote. And again, as Creisen told an audience of fellow neo-secessionists, at a national convention of secessionist groups in 2007, AIP Vice President Dexter Clark announced, or rather as the AIP Vice President Dexter Clark announced, that his party would seek to infiltrate the Democratic and Republican parties with candidates sympathetic to its hard-right secessionist agenda. Is that what we're seeing with Creisen and Stoll and Sarah Palin? And again, there are going to be links talking about the AIP and the Constitution Party. The AIP is basically the Alaskan affiliate of the Constitution Party, which in 2004 endorsed Michael Peroutka of the League of the South for president. The AIP basically backed Michael Peroutka of the League of the South as president. And Ed Butler of the Aryan Nations also endorsed the candidacy of Michael Peroutka of the League of the South. And again, the League of the South is a neo-Confederate white supremacist organization with the first African-American president seated on top of a disintegrating economy. It'll be interesting to see how these forces manifest themselves in the future. And what we're going to conclude with is by taking a look at something which, from a philosophical standpoint, sort of embodies Sarah Palin's, lipstick populist fascism. Again, she sort of represented herself as an every person or an every woman, the hockey mom pit bull with lipstick. And in her acceptance speech at the Republican convention, she had one small line which sounds really wonderful and all-American. One of the quotes that she said, "We grow good people in our small towns," Palin said, quoting someone identified only as a writer, "with honesty and sincerity and dignity." And as a writer in the blog sphere noted, that was actually a quote of a syndicated columnist from the 1930s and 40s named Westbrook Pegler. And I'll give the URL, by the way, for this particular blog article. The author notes, that writer, Wall Street journalist columnist Frank Thomas notes, is a man named Westbrook Pegler. You have probably never heard of him, but he was a very popular and very right-wing columnist from the first half of the 20th century. How right-wing? He openly wished for the assassination of Franklin Roosevelt, for one. And for two, he was quite the anti-Semite. He hated Jews so much that the far-right anti-Semitic John Birch Society banned him from their journal. And again, it sounds like a wonderful statement. We grow good people in our small towns with honesty and sincerity and dignity. Wonderful statement. Sounds great. Real all-American, real Norman Rockwell. But in fact, that comes from Westbrook Pegler. And George Seldes, arguably the Dean of American Investigative Reporters, in his 1943 book Facts and Fascism, devoted an entire chapter to Poison Pen Pegler, as he called him. And a little bit about this writer from George Seldes' Facts and Fascism, published in hardcover by In Fact Incorporated in 1943. By the way, the book is now online. It is the opinion of many persons and organizations that one of the most widely known and read newspaper columnists, Westbrook Pegler, is aiding the Axis rather than the United States in this war. It is a fact that the New York Newspaper Guild, the organization of thousands of Pegler's colleagues, so stated when it sent President Roosevelt a documentation of 12 instances out of Pegler's writings. It is a fact that newspapers, columnists, radio orators, and others who form public opinion have served the Axis propaganda. It is also true that too frequently those who know and who make these charges do not name names. They therefore emasculate their own words. Here, for example, is the director of the U.S. Conciliation Service, Dr. John S. Steelman, who wrote, "Careless recital of the dramatic side of strikes in the press and on the screen and over the radio has given too many people the impression that our war efforts are being held up in a serious way because of willful strife in a major part of American industry. This is a dangerous lie that serves the purpose of the Axis, but serves no good end among us," unquote. Dr. Steelman knows the culprits, but he is not in a position to name them. He is aware that Kaltenborn on the radio, Pegler in the newspapers, the entire Hearst and Howard press are those guilty of careless recitals about strikes. And I will put the URL for this particular online edition of George Seldes' Facts and Fascism, again with an entire chapter called Poison Pen Pegler about Westbrook Pegler, whose wonderful, all-American sounding, populist sounding words Sarah Palin quoted in her acceptance speech. But in fact, she was quoting the words of a virulent fascist columnist, and again the manifestation of an elitist, corporatist political philosophy as something beneficial to and part and parcel to the small town every person is part of the mythology of fascism. It's part of the mythology of the corporate state. And it's to a certain extent what Sarah Palin was manifesting with her nice, wonderful, homespun-sounding presentation at the Republican Convention. This concludes Side 2 of For the Record program number 652, Palin by Comparison. For references and some of the material that I've made references to in this broadcast, SpitfireList.com is the website. New site, same fight. This has been recorded on November 8th of 2008. My name is Dave